Politics in my Star Trek? How dare they not add even more politics to my Star Trek? Yes, hello interwebs and welcome to my latest review of the newest Star Trek novel, A Contest of Principles by one Greg Cox, who is a fairly well-known and well-noted Star Trek writer who I believe has been writing for well over 2 decades now. Greg Cox was always and has always been one of my favorite Star Trek writers. He wrote the Khan Noonien Singh two-parter backstory that I remember reading way back in middle school. So Greg Cox is a fairly well-trusted Trek writer who I have personally enjoyed, and this book is honestly no different. One of the things, and as I alluded to earlier in my joke at the top of this video, one of the things that I love Star Trek novels for is that they allow us to sort of do a deeper dive into an alien world, and alien politics, and alien machinations, and intrigue, and things like that than we would normally get in the Star Trek show proper, outside of like longer form aliens like the Romulans or Klingons, because up until fairly recently, Star Trek has been mostly episodic. So you didn't really get the chance to, when we meet a new alien world, a civilization, to really go deep into all these different types of machinations and things going on. And that's one of the reasons that I really love Star Trek novels, but this book really focuses in on that and really gives us a political thriller plot. In fact, gives us 3 distinct flavors of political thriller plots, and each one of them is incredibly interesting and I deeply love. Now, this book smartly splits up each plot and gives us a main character, one of the main trinity of Star Trek characters for them to focus on. There's a storyline for Kirk, there's a storyline for Spock, and there's a storyline for McCoy, and they do sort of dovetail and intermingle with each other, but they each are their own distinct storylines and their own, flavor with each type of character, and really dove into, like I said, a different type of political thriller story, and also really dealt with issues that we are facing today. One of the things that I really loved about this novel, and I'm going to focus on each storyline in just a second, but one of the things I really loved about this novel is that it was able to talk about a lot of very prescient issues. In fact, the opening chapters of the book are all about elections and election interference and, peaceful transfers of power and sort of a heated debate between 2 polarized people. That's like one of the storylines in this book, but it never becomes expressly directly metaphorical or expressly didactic. Now, don't get me wrong. I do not mind when my Star Trek gets incredibly didactic and goes after very specific people and specific situations in our real world. That's led to some of my favorite Star Trek episodes of all time. But what I think that this book smartly does, and it was written, clearly well before our recent election here in the United States, so it couldn't have focused on anything specifically, but it really touches upon some sort of broader based issues that we really saw, especially in the United States, but in other countries as well, throughout this, past few years of politics and elections, without saying specifically this specific person is terrible or this specific thing is terrible, but really focusing on the trends and ideas that we've seen crop up not only recently, but throughout history. And I think it really does a great job of sort of intermingling that, but never taking things away to say, oh, the Federation is a problem, which I know a lot of people have, because it's all focused on these distinct alien worlds. Well, that enough being said about that, let me actually talk about these distinct storylines for each character. The story focuses on 3 different planets. We have Voq, we have Braco, and we have Azalor. And each of the characters, like I said, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, each has their own storyline that focuses on each planet. Captain Kirk is on the planet Voq, which I keep getting confused with the character Ash Tyler every time I see it in the book. Ash Tyler's character in Star Trek Discovery, of which there are several references to Discovery in this novel, which I genuinely appreciated, even though this is an original series novel. But the first storyline focuses on Kirk, on Voq, as he tries to deal with a very heated election, and he is basically playing an arbiter of the election and trying to make sure everyone gets through safely, but he is not completely impartial. We have a clearly more militaristic commander who wants to get elected, and we have a much more peaceful, much more open-minded to having peace treaties with the other 2 planets that are involved in this storyline, because all 3 planets are kind of in a Cold War situation. They had a war years and years ago, and things are heated, but not necessarily at a breaking point at this point in the story. But that could change with the outcome of this election. And so Kirk is definitely much more on the side of wanting to help the more peaceful elector or person in the election. But obviously, as a Federation member, is there to help facilitate the elections in as fair a way as possible. And so I really love the storyline here of Kirk's sort of moral ambiguity towards the situation and sort of his sort of struggling with those issues. But the real meat of this plot is dealing with election interference and people trying to sway the election this way or that by dealing with assassination plots or public changing the public opinions on things, and also trying to mess with the elections themselves, with trusting the vote, or, whether they concede or not as the elector. Again, all issues that we are dealing with today, and voter interference, things like that. So this is a really taut, tight sort of thriller plot. It's definitely one of the more intriguing plots of the whole story, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but this one feels like much more like one of those sort of paranoia thrillers, like 5 Days of the Condor or Parallax View, sort of those sort of like assassination-y type of political thriller plots that we've seen numerous times throughout the year. So kind of a 1980s sort of political thriller with Kirk there, kind of tying in with more modern day election ideas, which I deeply, deeply loved. The second story focuses in on Dr. McCoy, who is kidnapped and taken to one of the other 3 planets, Azalor, where he finds that the daughter of the ruler of the planet, the king and the monarch of the planet, is incredibly, incredibly sick, and the only person that is able to heal this daughter on a regular basis, who she is reliant upon to constantly be healing her, is influencing her and her father to be more warlike. And so McCoy obviously does not wish to be kidnapped and forced to treat this girl, but he's also there to try and take away this sort of whispering, this sort of person whispering in her and her father's ear. And so McCoy is a doctor. He wants to take care of her. So he gets caught up in some really fun and interesting palace intrigue plots here. There's some fun little twists and turns. Again, this one feels much more like a kings and queens and palace intrigue Game of Thrones type plot. It definitely leans that way more heavily, but there's also a fair bit of medical drama going on here too, which I found to be incredibly fun and kind of a unique twist on that sort of storyline. The storyline is a bit more predictable than you would expect some other storylines in this book to be. It kind of goes exactly where I wanted to go, or where I thought it was going to go, but it's all very well done. There's some great characters, some great intrigue in there, and McCoy stands out, and it's great to see McCoy kind of getting a storyline on his own. It's so rare that we get McCoy-centric storylines, and so even though he shares space with 2 other storylines in this book, it's nice to have one where McCoy is sort of separated off on his own and has to deal with moral decisions on his own without Kirk or Spock next to him, and that's just really, really fun to see, and I greatly, greatly appreciated that plot. Probably the weakest of the plots is Spock's plot, where he is basically going in search of McCoy, but then kind of gets embroiled in sort of a terrorist and media issues on the second planet, Braco. This planet is one where, it's much more of a police state. There's a provisional government. There is a terrorist group that is fighting against this sort of police state provisional government, who are basically vilified, but not all is as it seems. And then there's also the media. There is the news that Spock must have to navigate in order to make sure that he can try and find McCoy, learn some information about where McCoy was taken, but also does not want to sort of sway things one way or the other with media's sort of looking on, and sort of the information that Spock gives the media has the tendency to influence things one way or another. So a more intriguing look at media and its relationship to how governments work and how governments form and public opinion is formed through the media. This one was interesting, but like I said, it was probably the one that was least developed. It didn't feel like it had as much going on. It was fairly perfunctory, and was also the shortest as well, considering that by inherently the nature of the story, Spock was actually more interested in finding McCoy, who was off doing his own thing. So this felt a lot more like a kind of a stally plot to sort of keep Spock away from finding McCoy. Now, that's not to say it's not interesting, but this one does stall out a couple times, where just sort of like Spock staying in place for a couple points without much to do here. So it's not bad by any means, but certainly the least interesting of all 3. That being said, all 3 stories are really, really fun, really engaging, and they all interweave with each other towards the end in really fun and interesting ways with some good twists and turns. It's very deft of Greg Cox to be able to handle 3 distinct storylines with their own characters and ideas going on in them, and make them all interesting and make them all intermingle really, really well within a singular book. But he does so quite ably, and I was absolutely in love with this book. This year has been a true gift for Star Trek novel fans. We have gotten so many Star Trek novels this year, and so many good Star Trek novels this year. And I would have to say that this one in particular might be my personal favorite Star Trek novel that was released this year, maybe second only to Una McCormack's Star Trek Picard novel, which I also deeply enjoyed. But this one, just for my own taste, I really love politics stuff, which is also why I love Una McCormick's book, because that one also dealt with the politics of the Romulan Star Empire falling apart. So you can kind of see what things that I really love. But for my money, I think this one handles the politics a little bit better, and it's a little bit more siloed, because that one was much more of a prequel to Picard, and so couldn't naturally end things as completely as I'm sure Una McCormick would have liked to normally, because it was sort of setting up things that go on into that show. Whereas this one is much more of a contained story that has a beginning, middle, and end, and 3 beginning, middle, and ends, and some really, really fun plot and character development in between. So I highly, highly recommend this book to anyone who is interested in Star Trek novels or political thrillers or science fiction political thrillers, but doesn't have the time to read like a huge space epic like The Expanse, which is my personal favorite science fiction political thriller. If you don't have the time to invest in all that, this will definitely whet your appetite for science fiction politics. How many times can I say politics in this video? But I deeply enjoyed it, and I would highly, highly recommend it. So what did you think of this book if you've read it? Let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for my reviews of all things Star Trek, all the TV shows, all the novels, all that stuff is right here on this channel. Also, don't forget I have a Patreon page where you can help me support doing this and doing these things that I do and the weird stuff and me just being a crazy strange person. You can help pay me money to be weird on camera. It's very much appreciated. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you to all of my patrons this month, but especially Amanda Ronye Idanya, Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Ellen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Bergmoss, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Munir Amlani, Chamomile T., Stephen Schuhart, Wellington Marcus, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Roar, Christina Dalliance, Dominic Noble, John Steele, Michael Beam. She sells seashells by the seashore of Bajor. William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, The Sir Spence, BBD, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Jason Knott, Andrew Jorgensen, Chris Brown, Jasmine, Maeve, Bree Beecher, Sabraxis, Skylar Gray, Nathan Steele, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Gretchen Badger, Geek Filter, Bush, Celestial Dawn, Din, Sarah Bastam, Polly Mina, Jacob Tovar, Piston Twisted Garage, Lily, Jean Mithun, Andrew Lamori, Lysa, Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen, and KT Dunn. Thank you so much to all of you. You're quite literally making my dreams come true, so I cannot tell you how thankful I am.